Okay, so what I want to do next is obviously instead of printing submitted when you submit the form, we want to take whatever this item name is that you've entered in here, like orange juice, and then extract it and then send that on up and update our state eventually. But first, we need a way just to get the value that's in this input. And there's two main strategies in React. One is to use state, have a piece of state that we basically bind onto this input or whatever input we have in the form. And we use the useState hook to help with that. And I'm not going to do that mostly because we've already seen useState. So I'm going to use ref. The built-in hook called useRef, I'm going to use that, which allows us to basically create a reference to something in the DOM that we can then access in our code. So I'm going to import useRef. And again, if this is totally new for you, this is going to be very quick and confusing. So I would take some time to try and understand useRef. But the concept is, and we get this nice little built-in documentation, is that it returns a mutable ref object whose current property is initialized to the past argument. The returned object will persist for the full lifetime of the component. And that's honestly a very broad explanation. But the way it's most commonly used is you'll set up some reference. So something like const input ref equals the result of calling useRef, like that. And then you can set the ref prop on any input or anything you want to be able to have access to in the DOM. So in this case, our input, I would say ref equals input ref, if that's the reference that I set up. Now there's a problem we're going to run into here. We get some nasty looking problems, but it says the expected type comes from the property ref, which is declared blah, 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 blah. And here's the problem. This is the type definition for useRef. It's a generic, and it's a generic that's expecting us to pass in a type. We are currently not passing in a type. And if you're confused about how this works, this is where I highly recommend checking out the cheat sheet that I mentioned early on. There's a section on hooks, useRef, and it shows how to use useRef. Provide only the element type as argument and use null as the initial value. So here's an example. You provide the type of element that we're setting up a reference for, and then null as the initial value. We'll come back to that. So it's not like you're totally in the woods trying to figure this out for all on your own. There's cheat sheets, there's examples that explain, here's a really common pattern. If you are using useRef to set up a reference for a DOM element, use this pattern in TypeScript. So what is the element that we are trying to, or what is the element type of an input? It is an HTML. So I'm going to add in my generic syntax, HTML input element. Okay, and so we're almost there. The next thing that we're going to do, though, is provide an initial value of null. Now, the reason we do that is the very first time that this function runs, this doesn't exist in the DOM, and so it needs to start as null. But then it will be updated after that. So now, input ref, inside of my handle submit, if I just console.logged input ref.current, which is the very important property on a reference, on a ref, I should be able to look at .value, for example. And hello. There we go. It's working. Now, you'll see that it added this question mark, right? We've talked about that, where this could be null if we look at input ref, or current rather. It may or may not have a value. It starts at null. So we can also just say it's definitely going to be there. Either one is fine. They're different. They have different meanings, but if we know for sure that there's going to be a value, which we do because on the very, 3 lines down, we're setting up this ref on an input, which always has a value, we don't need to worry. But instead of just console.logging, what we actually want to do is take that value out of the form, which we now have been able to extract, and update the state in our app and make a new item, right? We want to actually make a new shopping list item. So why don't we define a function in our app that will handle the adding of a shopping list item? So const add item is going to be a function. And what are we going to pass to it? We're going to pass in the new piece of text, right? The name, the product of type string. And why don't we start nice and easy? We'll console.log made it to the app component, because right now we can't call this function, right? And then let's console.log the product string. So we're not even adding anything to the state. I don't mean to capitalize that A. This function only exists in app right now. So just like all of React, we're going to need to, or very frequently in React, we need to pass things down. I'm going to need to pass this add item function down to shopping list form, right? So in here, I'm going to have a some sort of prop. I don't know what I'll name this. Maybe like on add item will be this function called add item. But of course, we run into the same problem we've seen many times, which is that our shopping list form component is not expecting this prop, let alone any props. So I need to say, don't worry, there's going to be a prop called onAddItem that is a function. So I'm going to do the same thing we did earlier. I'm going to define an interface called shopping list form props. And this is just for the props. And I'm going to say, you're going to get a function called onAddItem, and it has a signature where there's a parameter that's a string, and then it returns nothing. Okay, so we're almost there. And then in here, I'm going to say props is going to be of type shopping list form props. And then I can destructure if I want to. The thing that I want out of here would be on add item. Okay, so now I should have access to on add item, which in this case refers to add item, which is this function here. So let's try calling it now inside of our handle submit. So instead of console.logging input ref.current value, let's call this const new product. And then we can call on add item with that new product. And if we mess this up, if we passed a number through or something, TypeScript yells at us. It says, no, that has to be of type string. It knows the signature. All right, so if this works, we've basically just moved some of our handling logic up into the app component, but that means we'll be able to call set items in just a moment. All right, so I'm going to add in rice. Made it to the app component. Awesome. And then we see rice printed out. Okay. And one thing we can do real quick is clear out that input after we submit. Or after we call on add item, we'll just do input ref dot current dot value equals an empty string. So now you enter something in like orange juice, OJ. We see it. We made it to the app component, but then we reset the input. So the final thing to do in the next video, at least we're not even touching quantity right now, but is to make a new item in the state.